7 million people at 2,500 locations nationwide took part in Saturday's No Kings protest against Donald Trump's authoritarianism. 250,000 people showed up at our nation's capital and didn't storm it. What a novel idea. 150 Capitol police officers didn't have to be rushed to the hospital. Bernie Sanders addressing the crowd Saturday in D.C.
Take a look at this huge crowd right here in our nation's capital. But it is not just here, as I understand it. Today, October 18th, 2025, there are more people out on the streets in more communities all over our country than we have ever seen in American history.
That's right. Nearly 2 million American teachers belong to the American Federation of Teachers. Randy Weingarten, the president of that teachers union, spoke to the crowd in D.C., telling them,
"And what I've just been told, that in New York City, there are more people in Times Square than there are on New Year's Eve."
And twice as stoned. 350,000 took to the streets of my fair city, New York, to let our former neighbor, Donald Trump, know he's not welcome here. There weren't any arrests in New York City during the No Kings protests because there didn't have to be. At least 90% of police departments in more than the 2,500 locations where the protests were held nationwide Saturday, 90% of police departments reported absolutely no arrests. Police arrested more than 15 MAGA counter-protesters attacking peaceful anti-Trump demonstrators in Salt Lake City, as well as places in Ohio, Kentucky, North Carolina, Michigan, Florida, Virginia, Texas, and Pennsylvania. One counter-protester, a MAGA woman, was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for pointing a gun at No Kings protesters. In Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, another counter-protester, a man, was arrested for pointing a gun at some No Kings protesters. There were zero reports of any police officers anywhere being injured Saturday at any of the No Kings protests. In Denver, there are reports of police firing tear gas at 2 to 3 protesters who reportedly refused to disperse after the No Kings protests ended. They required no medical attention. Denver police reporting 2 hours after the No Kings protests ended in that city, they had to arrest about 36 people, some of whom reportedly threw rocks at police. One protester started a small fire in the middle of the street. It went out on its own. In Portland, Oregon, outside the infamous ICE detention facility, right after the No Kings rally, federal agents from the Department of Homeland Security fired tear gas at a crowd of 50 to 100 protesters. Portland's police immediately announced they were not the ones firing the tear gas. It was ICE. As far as we know, right now, nobody required medical attention. Of course, those ICE agents require psychiatric attention. Right before the No Kings rally began, Jesse Waters of Fox News showed video of federal agents outside the Broadview, Illinois ICE detention facility shoving peaceful protesters with the lower third reading, quote, "Agitators clash with cops" ahead of No Kings rally. The protesters in front of the Broadview, Illinois ICE detention center are not agitators. They are doing what Jesse Waters does, exercising their First Amendment right of free speech. ICE agents have unlawfully tear gassed the protesters, hit members of the clergy in the face with pepper balls, and arrested journalists who are just on the ground doing their job covering the protests. The agitators are the federal agents from the Department of Homeland Security, which is why a federal judge in northern Illinois last week issued a restraining order demanding ICE agents stop telling protesters to disperse. They are forbidden from firing tear gas at protesters, as well as journalists and members of the clergy. That was specifically written in the judge's order. But here is Jesse Waters of Fox News preparing viewers for the No Kings protests.
The BLM riots, Portland, the anti-Musk protests. Every time you guys get together, someone dies or there's a lot of fires.
Repeat the lie over and over. People who are stupid believe it. Someone dies or there's lots of fires. Okay, that's a flat out lie. I'm a broken record on this, but so is Fox News, and I'm going to keep correcting this lie. As long as they keep repeating the big lie that Black Lives Matter protests were violent, I'm going to debunk it. Now, 46 police officers died in 2020, the year of the George Floyd protests. 0 police officers were killed during those protests. You can Google all of this. 0 police officers were killed during the Black Lives Matter protests. About 46 police officers died in 2020, mostly from COVID, traffic accidents, and gun violence, totally unrelated to the protests. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, which tracks protests, rioting, and combat around the world, they reported that 97% of the 7,750 Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 were peaceful with 0 property damage or any violence. Now, 700 to 2,000 police officers were reportedly injured during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. The problem with that statistic, according to 3 major studies, the problem with that is most of the violence, if not all, during the protests started because of police officers, which is why local police departments had to pay out somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million in police brutality settlements after lawsuits were filed by Black Lives Matter protesters who were wantonly beaten and shot at by cops, and all of it captured on video. For example, here in New York City, we had to pay out $35 million to Black Lives Matter protesters because cops beat them and drove their cars into them. Denver forced to pay out $30 million. Philadelphia, close to $10 million. $17 million had to be paid out in Austin, Texas, with 19 police officers indicted. And of those 19 indictments, no trials yet. It's been, 5 years? Those indictments turned over to the Justice Department, and you know where that's going to go. Minneapolis had to pay out $30 million. And the litigation continues. By the time these police brutality lawsuits from the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 are settled, it could exceed $250 million paid out to Black Lives Matter protesters beaten up by cops. Violence only occurred in 3% of the 7,750 Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, and that violence was started by the police. It's why those protests started in the beginning. The cops in this country are violent. So, no police were killed. Maybe as many as 2,000 police officers injured during violence in 2020, violence that the police started at protests against police violence. Now, no police officer should ever be attacked. Nobody should throw rocks at police, and nobody should set fire to a police car, even if it just ran over a protester. There's no evidence that any of the police officers, none, were injured by Black Lives Matter protesters. There are always outside agitators as well as agent provocateurs. There are always store owners who loot and destroy their own buildings, seeing a protest as yet another opportunity for insurance fraud. It is estimated 27 million Americans took to the streets in 2020 protesting the murder of George Floyd and countless other black people at the hands of our police. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, according to Forbes, yes, Forbes, according to PolitiFact, USA Today, and The Guardian, Black Lives Matter protesters killed absolutely nobody, while it is estimated that as many as 42 BLM protesters and or innocent bystanders, including retired police officers, were killed either by counter-protesters or police. For example, in August of 2020, 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse showed up to a BLM rally in Kenosha, Wisconsin, with his AR-15 rifle. And video shows Kyle being welcomed by local police officers who handed him water, thanking Kyle for protecting property. Those protests, by the way, were in reaction to Kenosha, Wisconsin police officer Rustin Sheskey shooting Jacob Blake, an unarmed black man, in the back, shot in the back. Not once, not twice, not 3, 4, 5, 6, but 7 times. Shot 7 times in the back. Blake survived but remains paralyzed. Officer Sheskey said he thought Blake had a knife, didn't. A pocket knife was later found on the floor of Blake's vehicle, but he wasn't carrying a knife when he was shot 7 times in the back. The local district attorney eventually ruled that the 7 shots into Blake's back were justified because he had a knife in his car. Was he carrying the knife? No. Was he threatening to get the knife? No. Is a police officer with a gun powerless against someone who might have a knife? No. Gun beats knife. How come the officer didn't tase Blake first? Well, Officer Sheskey is back on the job, and people, after the shooting, took to the streets of Kenosha protesting it. And Rittenhouse showed up with his AR-15, 17 years old, and fearing he was about to have his weapon taken away from him, Rittenhouse panicked, fired his assault weapon, killing 2 BLM protesters, injuring 1. He was later acquitted after the jury decided he acted in self-defense. In February of this year, Rittenhouse spoke at a Turning Point USA event at the University of Memphis, where he mocked transgender students and insisted the protesters he shot at the Black Lives Matter demonstration that they were all funded by George Soros. Yes, because only people taking money from George Soros would be outraged by a police officer shooting an unarmed black man in the back 7 times. You'd have to be paid by George Soros to take to the streets to be appalled by that. Donald Trump, who was out of office at the time, immediately invited Rittenhouse to Mar-a-Lago and described Rittenhouse as a fine young man. So yeah, people died during the Black Lives Matter protesters. They were Black Lives Matter protesters who got killed by people like Rittenhouse. Nobody was killed, thank God, during Saturday's No Kings protest. But somebody was killed at the No Kings protest in June. Not a cop, a protester, a 39-year-old fashion designer and former Project Runway contestant who showed up for the No Kings protest in Salt Lake City. He died after getting shot in the skull accidentally by a self-described peacekeeper who was aiming at a 24-year-old male carrying an AR-15. So if you're filling out your bingo card, the good guy with a gun missed, killed a good guy with no gun but 2 kids, and nobody was charged with a crime. The guy carrying the AR-15, who the good guy was shooting out, turns out he wasn't breaking any Utah laws. He wasn't charged by Utah prosecutors for any crime, and apparently the guy who fired at him but missed and killed the father of 2, well, he didn't get charged either by Utah police. I guess he wasn't breaking any Utah laws either. I don't know. Someone once said, quote, "Every life lost to gun violence is a tragedy, but banning guns would cost us our ability to defend ourselves and our country. The Second Amendment," he said, "isn't free. Its price is vigilance and, sadly, sometimes blood." I forgot who said that, but I think he ended up getting shot to death. Was it last month in Utah? I think it was last month. Yeah. Jesse Waters from Fox also mentioned the spate of attacks on Teslas earlier this year, which prompted our Attorney General to announce anyone caught setting fire to a Tesla will be charged with domestic terrorism. Nobody should set fire to a Tesla, especially since Teslas do such a good job setting fire to themselves. According to the FBI, according to police reports, ABC News, NPR, and the New York Times, all the Teslas that were set fire in the United States this year was all done at night when the showrooms were closed. Nobody injured, nobody killed. A Tigard, Oregon Tesla dealership was shot at twice in March, both times after midnight, nobody injured. Whoever did that should be put away for 20 years. Anywhere between 150 and 200 Teslas were vandalized this year, either through graffiti or rocks thrown at them. There are reports that on April 3rd in Vancouver, Washington, a pregnant woman driving a Tesla was struck in the arm by a rock thrown at her car. She required no medical attention. The baby was unharmed. So Pam Bondi set up an FBI task force to go after people attacking Teslas and Tesla drivers. And she said they will be charged as domestic terrorists. Well, this task force so far has arrested 10, presumably charging them with domestic terrorism. All 10 are accused of setting fire to or shooting at Teslas in the middle of the night. If they're guilty, I have no sympathy for them. That being said, so far, one person, one Tesla driver, has been injured, hit in the arm by a rock. She required no medical attention. Well, here is Jesse Waters claiming the No Kings protests were organized basically by George Soros. That's the talking point, that if it weren't for Soros and left-wing organizations, nobody would be taking to the streets to protest Trump because we love him. We have to be paid to be angry at Trump. Here's Jesse Waters playing with your heads. He's claiming the No Kings protesters are what are called astroturf, not real. Whereas the Tea Party protests that began in 2009, Jesse says those were organic. But then watch as he gives it away and almost lets slip that the Tea Party protests were funded by the Koch brothers. Listen.
I usually we come out and do these things and it springs forth the Tea Party. That was like a legitimate protest movement. The Democrats are trying to do their little Tea Party thing. Ours was a little more organic. This seems a little more astroturfed. And remember, ours, we had political candidates that came out of it. There was a lot of organization. There was money raised. There was policies behind it. And it got a lot of traction.
It got a lot of traction because it was astroturf. He almost let slip there. Rewind it. He almost let slip that it was astroturf. He almost let slip that the Tea Party protests were the real astroturf. Okay, so in 2009, Obama's first year in office, the banks had already been bailed out by Bush in 2008, right after the financial meltdown. Remember the financial meltdown that happened in the final months of George W. Bush's presidency? So Obama comes into office in 2009 and passes the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. It's not for the bankers, that's for the American people and for jobs. And then that was a stimulus package to jumpstart the economy. And then a year later, the Affordable Care Act was passed, which gave us Obamacare. The first 2 years of Obama's presidency, he was confronted by Tea Party protesters who purported to be ordinary citizens complaining about being taxed to death. They dressed like revolutionaries from 1776 and said they were staging their own Boston Tea Party. Well, those people were and are incredibly ignorant. If you remember, those of you old enough to remember the American Revolution back in 1776, the rallying cry was no taxation without representation. But that wasn't what the Boston Tea Party was about. The Boston Tea Party was a protest for more, not less, more taxation. Colonists were upset that British tea merchants didn't have to pay the same taxes Dutch tea merchants had to pay. So the colonists dressed up as Narragansett warriors. Some historians say they were dressed up as Mohawk warriors, and they proceeded to throw British tea into Boston Harbor, protesting the fact that British tea is cheaper than Dutch tea because Dutch merchants have to pay taxes and British tea merchants don't. They wanted British tea to be taxed at the same rate as Dutch tea. More importantly, they didn't dress like revolutionaries during the Boston Tea Party. It was, as Alex Jones would say, a false flag operation, perhaps our nation's first. The Sons of Liberty dressed as Native Americans, either as Narragansett or Mohawk warriors. They did that so Native Americans, not the Sons of Liberty, would get blamed for destroying the British tea instead of Sam Adams and Paul Revere. So if the Tea Party protesters wanted to be historically accurate, they would dress like Native Americans, but that would be too much for their tiny brains to handle. Jane Mayer of The New Yorker reported on who was funding the Tea Party, and then in her book, Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right, she wrote and exposed how the Tea Party was created by Koch brothers' money, millions, hundreds of millions, quietly given to tax-exempt organizations like the Heritage Foundation, Freedom Works, Americans for Prosperity, and Club for Growth. Koch brothers secretly gave them money, and they spent millions bussing in Tea Party protesters, providing them with signs and costumes. In 2009 alone, the Koch brothers spent $100 million of their own money on the Tea Party. And that doesn't include what they gave to all those other dark money super PACs. Former Republican House Majority Leader Dick Armey was retired from politics by then, and his Freedom Works spent $20 million on a Dick Armey of Tea Party protesters. Armey personally donated at least $5 million of his own money to the Tea Party. Americans for Prosperity spent $50 million in 1 year. The Heritage Foundation, about $5 million. That is the definition of AstroTurf. The Tea Party was created, started in Chicago, by the way. That's not to say the No Kings rallies didn't get funded by left-wing Democratic organizations. You can't ask hundreds of thousands of people to show up in Times Square without some sort of paid organizers. In the end, all of this, the Tea Party, the No Kings protests, this is politics, and politics costs money. Some of the money for the No Kings protests does, in fact, come from George Soros, a couple million, but it also comes from unions, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, Warren Buffett's foundation, even Walmart heiress Christy Walton kicked in some change. The protesters, despite what conservatives want you to believe, they aren't being paid $200 each to show up. They're genuinely angry. J.B. Pritzker is a billionaire. He's also the Democratic governor of Illinois, which has become a flashpoint in Trump's war on the blue states. Here is Governor Pritzker speaking at the No Kings rally Saturday in Chicago, where 250,000 took to the streets.
Throughout history, we've learned that tyranny doesn't arrive with dramatic proclamations. Most times it comes quietly, wrapped in the language of law and order, with fingers pointed at someone who doesn't look like you, promising safety while demanding that we sacrifice our neighbors. Today, we're here to say with one voice that there is an existential threat to our constitutional republic. This is not a political choice. This is a moral imperative.
Chris Murphy is the Democratic senator from Connecticut. He spoke Saturday to the crowd in Washington, D.C.
We are not on the verge of an authoritarian takeover. We are in the middle of an authoritarian takeover.
That's a fact. That is a fact. As of today, Donald Trump's airstrikes on Venezuelan ships have killed at least 32 people. Lawyers for the Pentagon informed Pete Hegseth and Trump that by ordering these killings, they are violating American and international law. Trump claims they're drug dealers. And because he signed an executive order calling these drug dealers terrorists, he can now claim to have the constitutional right to use our military to kill these drug dealers who are now terrorists based on the 2001 war authorization granted to George W. Bush and every president afterward. That was in the aftermath of 9/11 to fight global war on terror. Right after 9/11, Congress passed a war authorization that gives a commander-in-chief, a president, authority to fight a global war on terror. So as long as you're labeled a terrorist, according to Donald Trump, he can kill you. Doesn't need congressional approval. Well, obviously, these attacks are illegal and unconstitutional. On Friday, Donald Trump was asked about two survivors from America's most recent airstrike on a submersible off the coast of Venezuela. A reporter Friday asked Trump, quote, "On Venezuela, there are survivors from your latest boat strike. What happens to those survivors? How dare you ask a question like that?" Trump turned it over to our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who was in the Oval Office to attend this meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky. And Rubio said, "We're not prepared here to announce all those details. These are terrorists." Rubio went on to say that more information would be released, quote, "when we are prepared to announce the details." When we're prepared to announce the details, we will. You're not going to go to Congress? War Powers Act says you have to go to Congress. This is an authoritarian regime, and the enablers are the Republicans who control the House and Senate. These military attacks are being conducted with absolutely no transparency. Compounding the problem is most reporters have stopped covering our Pentagon. To protest Pete Hegseth's demand, they take what amounts to loyalty oaths before being given press credentials to attend military briefings or even enter the building. In order to be allowed inside the Pentagon, reporters must sign an agreement promising to only write about official statements from the Pentagon press office, and they are forbidden from reporting on any documents, unclassified or classified, without first getting clearance from Pete Hegseth's communications office. This is what happens in authoritarian regimes. Reporters are not allowed to walk around the building without an escort, and they cannot talk to any military officials without prior authorization from Pete Hegseth's communications office. For 80 years, journalists have been inside the Pentagon. They've been granted workspace on the premise that the American people have a right to know. 30 major news organizations refused to sign the loyalty pledge, including Fox News and Newsmax. Only 15 organizations made up of One America News and some right-wing bloggers, they agreed to sign it. So we have a Pentagon right now launching illegal airstrikes on Venezuela, sending National Guard soldiers into the streets of Los Angeles. Troops from Texas and Illinois have been sent to Chicago, but a judge has temporarily blocked them from taking to the streets. And we have an administration that has zero intention of permitting journalists to do their job and report on this. Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, also spoke on Saturday.
Now listen, there are those in this country that have decided, after the behest of this president, to declare war on Chicago and American cities across this country. They have clearly decided that they want a rematch of the Civil War.
So we were told that the battle between Democrats and Republicans is reliving the 1960s. It really is reliving the 1860s. Our defense chief, Pete Hegseth, seen here with one of the many neo-Nazi tattoos adorning his body, he has found a workaround on a 5-year-old law forbidding military bases from being named after Confederate generals. He's renaming military bases after genocidal maniacs who took arms against our country. These are generals who fought America to protect their right to own black people. Meanwhile, Hegseth has removed from the Pentagon walls photographs of black veterans like Jackie Robinson and the Tuskegee Airmen, calling those images divisive, but pictures of his own wife, who never served in our military, well, those pictures have found their way to the Pentagon walls. You can go to the Pentagon and see pictures of Jennifer Hegseth. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia spoke in Atlanta, Georgia, where an estimated 10,000 protesters showed up on Saturday.
I heard an American president stand up the other day and say to generals in our military that we've got to stand up, he said, against the enemy within. Listen to me. I don't care what your politics are today. I mean that. If you are an American citizen, you should be deeply concerned. And I know you are. That's why you're gathered here today. We should all be deeply concerned about an American president who stood in front of our military and said that the real concern is the enemy within. They are trying to divide us so that they might rule us.
Well, why are we moving towards fascism? What do Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Trump, J.D. Vance, MAGA, what do they want? Well, Trump was put into office by billionaires who want cheap labor, so they divide the working class by race, religion, sex, and sexuality. But this White House also genuinely believes white Christians cannot live peacefully with anyone who isn't white and Christian. They proudly call America a Christian nation. And in private, sometimes they do this openly, they call America a country that belongs to whites. In fact, Trump is officially changing our immigration policy to favor white people. According to a State Department memo leaked to the New York Times, no more asylum seekers from countries with brown people. From now on, only asylum seekers from white European countries who are supposedly escaping oppression from black-run countries. In other words, no more Haitian immigrants, but white South African farmers are now welcome here. Democrat Stacey Abrams ran for governor of Georgia twice. On Saturday, she spoke to the No Kings crowd in Atlanta.
And yet we are living in a moment where ethno-fascists are in charge of the government, when Christian nationalists are making economic policy, when we have a secret police telling us who we are. Their destination is division. Their destination is destruction. And their destination is denied. We will not go back, and we will not let them turn us around.
Well, Vice President J.D. Vance last year, at this time, began spreading the lie that Haitians living in Springfield, Ohio, were stealing cats and dogs to eat them. He was the senator from Ohio at the time, and the Republican governor asked him to stop spreading this lie because these Haitian immigrants were hired by Republican business owners in Springfield, Ohio. And these Republican business owners also asked J.D. Vance to stop spreading the lie because they needed these Haitians to stay in Springfield to work there. But J.D. Vance refused to stop telling this lie about Haitians. Instead, he amped up the accusations, falsely claiming Haitian immigrants were responsible for an increase in HIV and tuberculosis outbreaks in the area. The Republican governor, again, said to J.D. Vance, stop, but J.D. wouldn't. So bomb scares poured into the city of Springfield, Ohio, and Ohio had to send state troopers to Springfield to protect elementary schools and municipal buildings to make sure nobody acted out on any of these death threats. Finally, J.D. Vance admitted he was lying, but said, if I have to lie to make a larger point, I'm going to do it. And what was the larger point? He said, white people are suffering in Springfield. Why? Because black people moved in. He didn't say that part. He said white people are suffering in Springfield. So he's going to lie about Haitians doing jobs that the white people won't take. After graduating from high school, J.D. Vance enlisted in the Marines and deployed to Iraq as a public affairs administrator. He stayed behind the Green Zone writing articles about our soldiers. He is a Marine veteran, not a combat veteran. He saw no action, but he did enlist, and he served in the Marines, who celebrated their 250th anniversary Saturday, while the No Kings protests were peacefully taking place around America in 2,500 separate locations. Now, because our founding fathers were steeped in the lessons from ancient Rome, they instilled in our nation gratitude but wariness of our military leaders. For as Shakespeare's Julius Caesar says of his military rival, quote, yond Cassius has a lean and hungry look. That's why Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of our Constitution calls for the president to be our military's commander-in-chief. Our military answers ultimately to an elected official, not a general who rose among the ranks. Civilian control of our military is the cornerstone of this republic. And although we've elected, give or take, 12 presidents who were generals or high-ranking members of the military, only 2, George Washington and Dwight Eisenhower, went directly from the military into the Oval Office. The rest got elected after retiring from the military. They were civilians, and then they ran for office. One of the reasons this country has had peaceful transfers of power, except for the Civil War, and Donald Trump in 2020, one of the reasons is our military is supposed to be above politics. Our military defends all of the United States, all of us, regardless of political belief. In America, civilians control the military. The military doesn't control civilians. The National Security Act of 1947, passed into law, mandates that in order to serve as our nation's defense chief, you must be a civilian for 7 years. Same rule goes for defense chief, deputy defense chief. To be in charge of our Pentagon, you can have a resume that includes military service, but you must be a civilian for 7 years before becoming defense chief, because we want civilian control of our military, not military control of civilians. When Trump nominated General James Mattis to serve as defense chief, it was President Obama in the final weeks of his presidency who signed a waiver passed by Congress allowing General Mattis to serve, even though he had only been a civilian for 3 years. So it required a congressional waiver. Our laws and our Constitution, they are very specific about civilian control of the military and making certain that our military is apolitical. Why? Because presidents are politicians who could be tempted to use our military for political purposes instead of keeping Americans safe. And if a president or a vice president carrying that president's water courts the military, not as commander-in-chief, but as a politician, he presents the risk of convincing our military to side with him should he, decide to cancel elections for what? National security reasons, and then declare martial law. History has shown us, and throughout the world we see this, that generals, along with elected leaders in democratic republics, are easily tempted by the charms of martial law, because martial law emboldens the elected leader into becoming a permanent one, and it gives more power to the people who wear our nation's uniform. Here is J.D. Vance.
And of course, Marines, I bring greetings today from our Commander-in-Chief, Donald J. Trump, and he wanted me to tell each and every single one of you that he's proud of you, that he loves you.
He loves you. He's a man of the people. He loves you. He's proud of you, each and every one of you. Here is Donald Trump in August of 2024 defiling Arlington Cemetery, breaking the law by turning Arlington Cemetery into a political photo op, posing with relatives of soldiers who died during Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan. You don't do this. Presidential candidates don't use widows or the children of fallen soldiers as political props. That's why you're not allowed to take photographs at Arlington Cemetery. Federal law specifically prohibits politicking or filming or photography for political purposes. As Trump walked towards Section 60, this is a very sacred part of Arlington. It's where our most recent soldiers have been buried. Police had to be called after a female Pentagon employee trying to stop Trump and his entourage was physically assaulted by Trump and his entourage, who shoved her out of the way and then walked to the gravestones. According to police, this female Pentagon employee who was assaulted, said she didn't want to press charges against Trump and his entourage for fear of what Trump would order his supporters to do to her. This, you're looking at it right now, this is a photograph. This is Trump standing with Gold Star families in front of the tombstones of 13 soldiers who died during Biden's pullout from Afghanistan. This is Trump smiling, giving a thumbs up in front of acres of tombstones alongside these Gold Star families. I've gone big here. Now, you see what I did out of respect? Because this photograph is actually against the law. You're not allowed to take pictures of tombstones in Section 60. So I blocked the names on the tombstones. You're not supposed to photograph them. I also blocked the pictures of all the children. You don't pose with children, especially children who lost their parent serving in Afghanistan. I blocked I forgot to block one of the children. There you go. There we go. I blocked Trump's face, another child in that picture. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Earlier, I mentioned Trump's first defense chief, General James Mattis, who required a congressional waiver to head the Pentagon. Last year, General Mattis criticized Trump for another photo op during the height of the George Floyd protests in 2020. On June 1st, Trump decided to walk from the White House through Lafayette Park to pose so he could hold a Bible in front of a church. At the time, about 200 Black Lives Matter protesters were demonstrating peacefully. It was right after the killing of George Floyd, June 1st, 2020. They were demonstrating peacefully in Lafayette Park, but Trump ordered the military to clear that park. And one journalist was hit by a rubber bullet and lost their eye. The protesters were tear gassed as military helicopters swooped in over them. And you can see, let me go wide here, you can see the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, Mark Milley, in camouflage, marching with Trump. Milley called this his most shameful experience ever in the military, and he apologized to his credit. General Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff then and during January 6, told Bob Woodward last year that Trump was, quote, a fascist to the core and, quote, the most dangerous person ever. Woodward asked General Mattis, remember, he's Trump's first defense chief. Woodward asked General Mattis if he agreed with General Milley's assessment of Donald Trump, and General Mattis said he believed everything General Milley said about Trump was both important and true. In other words, General Mattis said Trump is a fascist to the core. In 2020, General Mattis, no longer serving as Trump's defense chief, told Atlantic Magazine that Trump was a threat to the Constitution. And then, right after January 6, 2021, General Mattis issued a statement accusing Trump of, quote, fomenting January 6, called it an attack, in an effort, quote, to subjugate American democracy by mob rule. That's General Mattis. And then there is retired four-star Marine General John F. Kelly, who first served as Donald Trump's Director of Homeland Security and then as his White House Chief of Staff. General Kelly told Atlantic Magazine that on a trip in 2018 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the end to World War I in France, Trump refused to visit the graves of 2,000 American GIs, saying, quote, why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers, unquote. During the same trip, Trump told General Kelly that 1,800 Marines killed in battle during World War I were, quote, suckers and losers. General Kelly's son died, I believe, in Iraq. I apologize. I think it was Iraq. I'm not sure. Either Iraq or Afghanistan. Visiting General Kelly's son's grave at Arlington, Trump said to him, quote, "I don't get it. What was in it for them?" General Kelly said that in a 2018 meeting to plan a White House event for wounded soldiers, Trump specifically told him not to include any amputees, saying that would make him uncomfortable, adding, quote, "That's not a good look for me," unquote. So, General Kelly's remarks were first reported by The Atlantic magazine in 2020, and they were confirmed by 4 sources. Trump sued The Atlantic for $950 million in a defamation lawsuit that was dismissed with prejudice by an appeals court. Dismissed with prejudice means it can't be refiled. Which brings me back to J.D. Vance and the move by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to politicize our military. Here he is attempting to turn our Marines on the 250th anniversary of the Marines Saturday. Here is J.D. Vance attempting to turn our Marines against the Democratic Party. This was happening while the No Kings protests were going on, because this is what fascism looks like. Convincing soldiers that our dear leader is looking out for you in this us versus them scenario Trump has created, where the real enemy is from within. This is what fascism looks like.
And that despite the Schumer shutdown, he is going to do everything he can to make sure you get paid exactly as you deserve.
The Schumer shutdown.
Now, I know we're here to talk about the Marine Corps, but I got to get just a little political, because congressional Democrats seem to want to keep the government shut down, even though it would mean that a lot of you would not get your paycheck. But as I told the president just a couple of days ago, I said, "Sir, we have got to figure out how to pay these Marines, both for their sake, but also, of course, because if we don't pay our enlisted Marines, every bar in Southern California is going to go out of business, and we don't want that."
Well, not if Pete Hegseth is visiting Southern California. Our alcoholic defense chief can do the drinking of an entire division of Marines. Some of you might remember Vice President J.D. Vance at the beginning of this year endorsing Alternative for Germany. That's a party of neo-Nazis that came in second during this year's parliamentary elections. But due to what is called a firewall preventing Nazis from holding positions of power, the conservative government swept into office refused to form a coalition government with Alternative for Germany, despite Alternative for Germany scoring second in February's elections. Vance, before the election, when it was apparent that the conservatives were going to win and that Alternative for Germany was going to come in second, Vance spoke at the Munich Security Conference right before that election, and he scolded the Germans for ostracizing Alternative for Germany, which he called a party of patriots. Alternative for Germany candidates ran on a policy of repatriation, where all Muslims in Germany, including Muslim citizens of Germany, would be sent back to their country of origin. Vance urged the conservatives to form a coalition government with Alternative for Germany if the conservatives won. Vance called Germany's firewall against Nazis a democratic scandal. Last month, welcoming a representative from this party of Nazis, Alternative for Germany, Vance said, Alternative for Germany fights the same battles we do. Elon Musk, also a huge supporter of Alternative for Germany, during a rally Before that election, Musk agreed with the party's leader that Germany has to stop feeling guilty over the Holocaust. You're all familiar with last week's expose in Politico entitled Inside the Young Republicans' Secret Chat, Hitler Jokes, Rape Fantasies, and Holocaust References. That was the title. Politico got its hands on a Signal group chat used by nearly 200 members of the Young Republican National Federation. Contained within those group chats are hundreds and hundreds of messages celebrating Hitler, jokes about the Holocaust, how we have to bring back the ovens to finish the job, and heartfelt justifications for the Nazis. Vance immediately defended the Young Republicans, saying, quote, "The reality is that kids do stupid things, especially young boys. They tell edgy, offensive jokes. That's what kids do." Young boys. That's what kids do. The median age of Young Republicans, 27. There were 40-year-olds on that group chat. The Establishment Clause contained within the First Amendment specifically forbids our government to force a state religion on the American people. But in September of last year, out on the campaign trail, J.D. Vance told an audience, quote, "I certainly believe this is a Christian nation. We were founded on Christian principles." Speaking at the Republican convention, Vance declared, quote, "America is a Christian nation," unquote. He repeatedly accuses the left of, quote, "stealing our nation's Christian birthright." Here is Vice President J.D. Vance speaking to the Marines on Saturday, telling them there is no room in this man's army for anyone who isn't Christian.
Now, I remember when I was a young recruit in boot camp talking about how politically correct things got maybe over the last few years, and I compare it to my time in the Marine Corps. I remember I was lining up as a young recruit to go to church one Sunday morning, and back then there were two lines. There was the Catholic line, and there was the Protestant line. And I remember we all get into our lines, and there's one recruit who's just kind of standing there by himself. And you know, the folks watching on TV may not realize that Marines refer to themselves in the third person when they're in recruit training, because you haven't earned the title of United States Marine, and so you have to say "this recruit" instead of "I." And so you've got this one recruit standing out there by himself, and the drill instructor says, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" And the recruit says, "This recruit is an atheist." And the drill instructor says, "Bullshit, get in the Catholic line." That didn't work in the Biden administration, Pete. That didn't work in the Biden administration. But now we recognize that it is not our diversity that makes us stronger. It is our common purpose. It is our common mission.
Common purpose, common mission. No room for atheists. No room for anyone who isn't Christian and white. And white. Here is Pete Hegseth, our defense chief, addressing the Marines on Saturday.
You are set apart for a distinct purpose. You kill bad guys and break things for a living. You close with and destroy the enemy for a living.
I don't even know where to begin explaining how insulting that is to the men and women who wear our uniform. Soldiers are not hitmen or hit women. They're not killers for hire. As I've said countless times, the role of a soldier is to win the hearts and minds of civilians in countries where we've deployed our soldiers. When you speak to veterans who served in Iraq or Afghanistan, they don't look back proudly on the people they killed. It's the schools they protected, the children they gave toys and candy to, the hospitals and water treatment plants they protected and helped build. Soldiers aren't proud of the corpses they left behind. They are proud of delivering food, water, medicine, setting up clinics and hospitals for the population, protecting polling stations when those citizens get to vote, repairing power grids, training local police. There are thousands of other assignments given to our soldiers that have absolutely nothing to do with killing. For a defense chief to insult the intelligence of the Marines, basically calling them brain-dead Luca Brazzis who only know how to kill and blow up things, well, that, along with a lot of other things, automatically disqualifies Pete Hegseth from being defense chief or even serving in our military. But you would expect this kind of talk from a man whose body is littered with neo-Nazi tattoos like this one. Or the Deus, where are we going here? Sorry, why are we not saying the Deus Vult tattoo? There it is. Or the Deus Vult tattoo on his bicep. I get pushback from some Trump supporters who listen to this show about Deus Vult. So let me set you straight. Deus Vult means God wills it. It, in Latin, it was originally a battle cry used by Christian crusaders. Remember the word crusaders, okay? Deus Vult was originally a battle cry used by Christian crusaders when they were attacking Muslims in the Holy Land. It's now been co-opted by anti-immigrant white nationalists in Europe trying to rid said continent of Muslims in order to achieve their idealized vision for a purely white and Christian Europe. Pete Hegseth's book in 2020 was entitled American Crusade. Crusade is a freighted word. And as a graduate of Princeton, Pete Hegseth knows exactly why it's a loaded word. Crusade comes from the Crusades, Christianity's war on Islam. In his book, American Crusade, Pete Hegseth writes that Islam, quote, is the natural historic enemy of the West, unquote. In his book, he says Islam is not compatible with Western forms of government. Hegseth writes that Islam has never been a religion of peace. This is why the Council on American Islamic Relations called upon the Senate to reject Pete Hegseth's nomination, calling Pete Hegseth, quote, a warmongering anti-Muslim extremist. An anti-Muslim extremist. So yes, this Deus Vult tattoo, along with his other tattoos, is a 50,000-watt warning sign telling the world Pete Hegseth is, to put it mildly, a white Christian nationalist. And it's why he wasn't allowed to guard Joe Biden during the 2020 inauguration. Hegseth was National Guard, and he offered to stand with the military to protect Joe Biden. And the military saw his tattoos and said, oh no, absolutely not. And you know who told me that story? Pete Hegseth. Not me personally, but that's according to Pete Hegseth, that he wasn't allowed to serve in the National Guard after January 6th, after the military saw his tattoos. And now he's our defense chief. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. On a personal note, I want to thank everybody who protested on Saturday. And Portland, you amaze me. I spent last night looking at videos of the frog, the inflatables. I love you. I love you, Portland. And you're teaching all of us how fighting for your country can be joyful. I thank you. I thank you. God bless Portland. If you're going to travel, go to Portland. Spend your tourist dollar in Portland. Don't go to Florida. Don't go to Florida. Go to Portland, Oregon, if you have money to spend. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. Please share this episode so I remain in your feed. Please hit the like button. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. As you know, if you're a longtime listener, subscribe to my newsletter. Do all the things that, you know what to do. Thank you.